Good morning, everyone. Hope you are all doing well today. This is Joshua. It's 9 o'clock in the morning here on the Pacific Coast, noon over for our East Coast friends, and times in between for everyone between those two coasts. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. We're going to be doing today a deeper dive. Now, we've been doing these for several weeks. And what they really are is an attempt for us to take time that we would usually have in our stores to discuss coffee at length, knowing that people aren't able to get to our stores as much now, and also knowing that folks still want to learn about our coffees. So we've done single origins, we've done blends. Today is going to be another blend. And it's actually the reason I've kind of been focusing on blends for the last couple weeks is because they're very popular. They sell very well for us, and that's just kind of an easy decision, right? To highlight those things which are a lot of our customers really enjoy. Now, if you haven't enjoyed this blend before, we're definitely going to put a link up for you to try it out by going to the website. And of course, reminding everyone to always consider that you can use our 10% discount when you use the code WATCHANDLEARN10 when you're purchasing from the website, knowing that you've been directed from these videos that you all participate in. We really appreciate you spending your time with us today as we take a deeper dive into a great blend of coffees called Bohemian Blend. Now, as the name implies, Bohemian Blend has some qualities that are, we refer to it as a darker roasted coffee, and it brings out some flavors that we can associate with that more fully developed coffee. Now, there is still some floral elements. We think of that as a honeysuckle, is the specific floral quality that we discuss. There also is the quality of sherry. Sherry is a fortified wine, which means that there's a wine base that is made, and then after the wine has been fermented, there's the addition of alcohol to that. And then something which is, I think, unique in descriptors for our coffee is malt. I'm showing a grain here, but of course, malting is a process that actually involves taking grains, drying them a certain level, and then actually, after they've been dried, steeping them, for lack of a better term, steeping them so that they sprout. And then after the sprouting, that changes the internal parts of the grain to transform and bring out elements of sugars. And then after that sprouting, they're dried again. It's really interesting when we think about that in relation to roasting coffee. We know that when we're roasting green beans, we are actually developing and bringing forth and highlighting aspects of sweetness and sugars. So hopefully, with the dark roasted coffee, we've been able to coax things out of it that are sweet. Lots of folks might think of a coffee that has a darker profile as a bitter, sometimes you'll hear people say, or over roasted or burnt. That's not the experience we're looking for when we talk about a coffee that's been more developed. We're talking about these types of sweetnesses that were just described when we consider the floral aspect of honeysuckle, the sweetness of a malt, and then also the sweetness of a sherry. Those qualities are there, but they all have an underlying body to them as well. So we want to brew the coffee today. Usually, you know that I use my Clever, but today I'm going to shake things up a little bit, and I'm actually going to be using a French press. So we also know that we focus a lot on measurement, ratios, and how we use tools to brew coffee. Today, we're going to be a little more free form, and the reason for that is, you know, we have to remember that we're dealing with coffee, and the ultimate judge of a coffee is you, of course. how you are tasting the coffee and how it's working for you. So I'm going to use this Bohemian coffee and a French press. French press, one of the really just the great way if you aren't hand brewing coffee at home, it's a great introductory tool to start using because it is, first of all, really simple. And it creates a big cup of coffee. And with a roast or with a blend of coffees like Bohemian, I think it shines really well because it really allows that whole coffee to be there, right? And some of the things we're looking for with these more developed roast profiles or blends are some of that kind of intense, rich, syrupy element that is represented so well in a French press. So I think it lends itself to this specific type of coffee. Later today, Brendan is going to be, I'm sorry, I might have confused. It might be actually on Wednesday. Brendan is going to be doing a coffee, the Bohemian as well, but in a different style. And I'm sure he'll post that up here to discuss more about it. So we talked about this, and I'm going to actually be using the French press, and he's going to be, I believe, using a clever with some clever hacks. Now, I also wanted to use French press today because I wanted to change up the way I usually talk about the French press. Because it actually is a relatively versatile way to brew coffee if we remember some of our fundamentals. So I'm taking away the scale today, and I haven't weighed my coffee. I've used volumetric measurement, and I'm not going to weigh the water that goes in. I have a pretty good idea of the measurement, and the great thing is that when we are brewing coffee by hand, each day you get to decide what you think has worked well. Maybe it's a little bit, you feel like it's too much coffee. You can back it off the next day, right? Maybe you make it steep a little bit longer and back that off as well, or increase it. That's the great thing about brewing by hand, is that we get to make these choices based off of what we like. So I'm going to go ahead and make this coffee, and then we'll talk a little bit about the components of the blend as it's brewing. There it is. Brendan will be featuring the Las Brisas in the Clever Dripper, not the Bohemian. Sorry, too much going on up in the old noggin here. All right, so one of the things I'm going to do, which I don't usually talk about, is often we have put hot water into our vessel already. We've already put water into our French press, and the reason for that is we're preheating it so that none of the heat of the water that we're using is actually used to heat the vessel while we're trying to brew coffee, so that the hot water is going onto coffee in a warm environment, so we don't lose any of that heat in the water. It's not transferred to the vessel rather than going towards the brewing of the coffee. What happens when you do that is that there's water along the sides of the press, right? And so in order to do that, I'm going to replicate kind of a drop hopper from an espresso grinder with just a simple funnel. This is a canning funnel, right? They fit down over the tops of ball jars. If you're doing canning, you can get them in any store. So this way, when I pour the coffee in, it kind of goes straight down and stays away from the sides, so that I don't get any coffee along the sides if it's wet, because I've just pre-soaked the press with hot water to warm it up, right? So this way the coffee is all at the bottom. And the reason we don't want coffee along the sides is, of course, because I'm going to do a modified technique here in which I'm going to actually bloom the coffee to start with at the bottom of the press, just like we bloom with other pour-over techniques. And then I'm going to fill the rest of the press up, right? So if there was coffee along the side of the vessel here, of course, it wouldn't be blooming. It would be stuck on the side of the vessel. Usually with the French press, we fill it all the way right up, right away, then we stir. I'm exchanging that. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to bloom first, and then I'm going to add the rest of my water and have that stand in for my agitation that I would usually do at the end of filling up the container. So another thing that I'm doing, which you probably have caught on to, is we've talked about some of these blends that have components of more fully developed coffee. I'm going to lower the temperature of the water that's going into the French press. Usually we're just off a boil when we're doing our pour-over techniques or our French press. In this case, I'm actually using water that's been held at 195, and I do that by using my Bonavita gooseneck kettle, which is a variable temperature kettle. All right. So we're going to go ahead and do this first blooming of the coffee, and I'm going to start my timer. All right. You know what? Let's go ahead and do that too. A little bit of a swirl. You see, I don't know if I can show you. It's going through the same process that blooming always goes through when we do it. The coffee bed, that bed of coffee is rising up as gases are released, and gas is being pushed through the different particles of the coffee, and you'll see the bubbles forming in the top. And as we get to 30 seconds, I'm then going to continue to fill. Another good reason to have one of these variable temperature kettles with a gooseneck on it is that it allows us to really direct where the water goes. And so I'm using this really vigorous method in which I've kind of agitated and stirred the coffee as it's gotten up to the top. And then a final thing that I always like to remember to do with the French press, when I put this lid on here, I'm going to just press it down ever so slightly so that the bed of coffee, that's a lot of it's still floating at the top, so that it actually presses that down below the water level. And then my timer is running. So while the timer is running, we're actually going to we're going to take off. I'm going to add this display capture over here, and I'm going to take off my browser there, so we can talk a little bit about this coffee on our website, so you can see where it's located. We'll go over here to the monitor, and when you go to Backdoor from Bronson, you go to the Bohemian blend, and you pull it up. I always, and if you're watching these, you're probably hearing me say it over and over again, but I really recommend you go over to this detailed coffee report, right? Because what that allows you to do is to actually take a look at what Bob has to say. So Bob, of course, is our green bean buyer, and he will write these reports talking about what the coffee team has gone through as they've tested the coffee, they've formulated a blend in this case, and then as they roast it, all of the flavor notes. And then also, we'll often have techniques in here for different brewing styles, right? So it's a nice resource to have. Now, the one thing we talk about in this report is the locations of the coffees that are part of it. Now, the majority of it comes from Latin America, Central America, and specifically, and Nicaragua. High elevation Nicaraguan coffee from Las Placeras is used. That high elevation allows for a denser bean. That denser bean is what gives the roasting team the ability to apply a higher profile roast to it, or a roast that's further along on the profile spectrum. That density is what helps them with that, so that we can create the quality of sugars that we're looking for as we fully develop a coffee. And then also, we have Indonesian coffee in here as well, right? So this is a two-region coffee from both what we call the Asia Pacific region, and then from Latin America. So in addition to the Nicaraguan coffee, there are also other Latin American, Central American coffees that are used in order to bring out a little bit of brightness. Because you consider when we roast that Nicaragua and it has a little bit darker profile applied to it, that creates some qualities that we want. The depth, the body, a little bit of a smokiness maybe even in the finish on the palate. But we're making a blend because we want to be able to highlight other qualities of coffee. If it's just that one type of roast profile, there's things we want there, but we want to bring in other elements. So the other Latin Americans are added for a bit of brightness. The Indonesian coffees are included for spice, often what we call spice, and also for some body quality as well. A different type of body than you find through just using a roast profile. So there is our coffee. I've plunged the French press. I'm going to let it sit for a minute. I just want it to cool down slightly because I don't always want there to be temperature affecting my ability to taste the coffee. Some folks like their coffee really hot. I don't. I like to let it cool off a little bit, mostly because if I don't, then when I drink it and my palate gets overwhelmed by the heat, I'm not going to be able to taste it. And the whole point of putting energy and effort into hand brewing coffee is we want to be able to taste the coffee, right? So I'm going to let it cool for a second, and I think we've talked about the Bohemian blend. I wanted to call it out because you'll notice if you read through the coffee report, it is in line with some other blends that are used by some of our wholesale accounts for espresso and drip coffee. And again, that's another element of blending that we take into consideration, right? That we love our single origin coffees because they're absolutely unique and they speak to a moment, to a terroir, to a specific growing season in a region, and to a type of coffee. And they're unique. The same coffee from the same area might taste quite a bit different, actually, the next growing season. And that's why we love the single origins, because they express that element of the agricultural product that we love so much. Blends we like because we're able to create a consistent cup profile across growing seasons, and we're able to replicate it, and we're able to capture it and have those qualities. In this case, that sweetness, the maltiness, that lingering body and finish that it just makes this such a nice like morning coffee for a lot of folks. We're able to replicate that every year, right? And the reason then that translates to kind of commercial use, for lack of a better term, why coffee houses and coffee shops like it, is because of that consistency that we're able to create, whether it's making espresso or making drip coffee. So of course, there's some of our kind of really popular blends that you have in our cafes and our wholesale partners. Dancing Goats is the first one, right? And we've talked about that blend. But there are others that people use as well for their espresso and their drip coffee. And that would be Whirling Dervish, which is our fair trade organic, kind of the largest blend we do after Dancing Goats. And then we get into these even slightly darker roasts, for example, the Vesuvio, or in this case, the Bohemia. And the Bohemia is actually used by our wholesale customers as well, because they like the way that finish comes out. Specifically, it's the finish, I believe, that we experience with the coffee. And I have to say, I get it. I mean, I came up in this industry in the 90s. That's why I have all these gray hairs. And for sure, we definitely roasted coffee darker when I was first coming up in espresso. That was just a trend that was the way things were kind of done at that time. And over time, we have across the industry, we've adjusted the way we roast coffee slightly to make lighter profiles more prominent. And as a company, we of course have adjusted with that as well, because there are different coffees available and there are different customers available as well. And I will tell you that I love some of our medium and lighter roasted coffees for sure. And again, it's much like that difference between single origins and blends, right? They occupy different places in our culinary world. I love some lighter roasted coffees. And when it comes down to it, I imprinted on darker roasts. I most certainly did, right? That was what formed my love for coffee as I was first getting into this business, was coffees that were more fully developed. So I still have a really warm spot in my heart for these more fully developed coffees. And I recommend, if you are someone who really like, you just love the lighter roasts and some of the lighter roasted coffees that we do, try this one out. I would just say, just give it a swing. You know, you never know. Remember, there are aspects of the brightness that we've captured by adding in other coffees into this blend. So you might be surprised when you try this. And also, if you're a person who has, you know, had bad experiences with dark roasted coffee, give our darker roast a try. Give our more fully developed coffees a try. You might be surprised, right? A coffee that is more fully developed should be sweet, should have a nice lingering smoke quality on the palate that is not acrid or bitter. It should be gentle and it should be lush on your palate. That's what our team works to create, and I hope if you haven't tried it before, you might give it a try, right? And then check back in with us and tell us what you think. So just remember one thing: if you are trying some of our more fully developed coffees, just lower your temperature of your water down a little bit, right? Just, you know, ease off a little bit on that water temperature. And I think that might help you capture some of the things that we love about this coffee in your cup. I want to let you know that tomorrow Bob is going to be here at 9 o'clock, and we're being joined by the Mirsch family. So that will be lovely. Will be another discussion with some of our long-time partners in coffee, people we buy coffee from, and they will be calling in to us. So that will be a great conversation that we have tomorrow at 9 o'clock here, noon Eastern Standard Time. And then also tomorrow, Brendan is going to join us, and he's going to be using a Clever Dripper. Now, I took the French press and did a little bit of modification to how I usually brew, because we always want to be talking about playing with our tools, right? We know that they are tools to use and we get to use them in different ways. Brendan's going to do the same thing with a Clever Dripper tomorrow during his show, and that is going to be 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. And then on Thursday, I'm very excited. At the 9 o'clock slot, we're going to be joining Jim, who is our facilities manager and our sustainability leader in the organization. And he's going to give us a tour of the roasting facility in Olympia live, and then talk through some of the programs that he, along with others, have developed over time that make us so proud about our footprint, you know, when we talk about our sustainable practices. We really think that we do a great job on always balancing our business with our ecological footprint, and Jim's going to talk about some of those things at 9 o'clock on Thursday, and then back again on Friday to join Ben in the coffee garage as he discusses something fun and exciting. I don't know what it is yet, but it's always both a surprise and a delight to join him. Again, thank you all so much for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you the rest of the week as we turn our homes into cafes.